My name is Steve Weber, and I'd like to share with you my experience in the place between here and there, a beautiful near-death experience. I guess it all happened about 10 years ago when my life changed. Up until that point, I lived a very pseudo-normal life. I was definitely a alt personality. I was a Harley rider. I rode motorcycles all my life, ever since I was a young boy. I was also a computer guy, and I owned my own business with my brother. When I wasn't riding my Harleys, I was working on my computers. I had two young children, and they were my life. They changed me in so many positive ways and really challenged me the way children can often do. One night, I guess it was 4th of July weekend. It was back in 2005, and I had left Jugs and Strokers after riding all night. It was very late. It was like 2 a.m. in the morning, and I was driving down the Meadowbrook Parkway. I was heading northbound. I was just putting along the way I normally would, and then to my left, I saw a gentleman driving in a pickup truck, and he was awfully close to me, and something didn't feel right about it. And I looked around, and I realized this gentleman was driving the wrong way. He was driving northbound in the southbound lane. And I tried to reason it out, was I really seeing what I was seeing? There was construction on the road, and maybe he was a construction vehicle. But after a few moments, I realized that wasn't the case. He was driving the wrong way. And just then, the guardrail between us disappeared, and he was driving almost right next to me. And I knew if he realized what he was doing, he might just run right into me. So I quickly moved over 3 lanes to the far lane. And just then, the fellow went underneath a bridge and went headlong into a limousine. Head-on crash. He killed a little 7-year-old girl and the limo driver. Although it was late at night, people were on the scene immediately. And after seeing what had happened, I drove home. I couldn't have been any help, and there was help there. And I went to sleep. And the next morning, I looked in the paper, and it was on the front page of the paper, and they were looking for witnesses. And I didn't want to be a witness. It seemed to me the facts were clear. There were allegations that this gentleman had been drinking, and that all the facts seemed very clear. And I just put it aside, and that's the way my life went. And then about a year later, a person told me to look at the newspaper. I looked at the newspaper, and there was a trial going on. This fellow was being charged with homicide, 2nd-degree homicide. I knew I had to come forward at that point, and I did. I participated. I was a witness for the prosecution in the trial. It was a very, very, very difficult thing for me because first off, when I walked into the courtroom, I took a look at the fellow who was on trial. He looked like he could be me, and I certainly wasn't any saint. But I understood the gravity of what had happened, and I was committed to going through with this. But I couldn't help but think, for the grace of God, that wasn't me. And so I gave my testimony, my honest testimony, and I was on the stand for 2 days. And I believe I turned that case around for the prosecution. There was a lot of problems with the case, and they convicted the young fellow, and they sentenced him to 16 years in prison. And that's the way that happened. And it changed my life in such a big way, because I remember seeing the parents, and they were very upset at the judge for only giving the defendant 16 years. And I felt for the parents. I understood the way that they felt. But wow, the kid was such a young kid, and it stuck with me for a long time. Both things, both stories. After that trial, I couldn't go back to my regular life. I couldn't. I sold my business to my brother, who was my business partner, and I became a full-time dad. I did some computer work on the side, but that was my life. I was going to be a full-time dad. I was not going to miss out on my children because I saw the heartbreak in those families, and I wasn't going to make the same mistakes. I became very involved in local politics. I was elected to a school board. I had the government clean up a toxic waste dump. It was just a wonderful thing. I really started to make purpose of my life and the life of my family, and life was good. I live on Long Island, and the Hamptons are out on Long Island, and that's where all the famous people go and all the beaches. And so I like to drive out there on Sundays on my Harley and go to a barbecue place. You know, it's one of those roadside stands you could drive by and not even notice. But I had gone to the roadside barbecue place, and then on the way back, the road was crowded. It was more than just usual beach traffic. I think there was an accident or some emergency road work, and the cars were backed up for miles. And I had this brand new Harley Davidson, but it was just so heavy and the traffic was so long and it was so hot out. And I noticed that people were going on the shoulder of the road to make a right-hand turn ahead to get out of the traffic. After staying there for quite some time, that's what I decided to do. And so when I approached the intersection, just at the same time, a car opened up a space for a truck in the oncoming lane to make a left-hand turn. And when he did, the truck went slamming right into me and the lights went out. And the next thing I remember, I was laying on the road and I was looking up and I could tell a lot of time had passed because it was starting to become twilight. And then I saw all of these lights all around and they were all flashing. And I realized something terrible had happened. I still didn't know I was in an accident, but it was a surreal experience. And I remember the emergency worker telling me to stay down because I tried to get up. And as soon as I got up, I felt bones sticking into my leg. It was like my leg was disconnected. I was just in agonizing pain. And then I laid back down on the road. And then the next thing I knew, I was flying through the air. I was going through the clouds. I just kept on going higher and higher and higher. I wasn't sure what was going on, but all of a sudden I started to approach the ground. And then I looked down and I saw this big round circle on the ground. And I saw these buildings and I knew exactly where I was. I was in a helicopter and I was looking down on Stony Brook Hospital, one of the premier trauma centers in the United States. So I knew exactly where I was. And as the helicopter landing, I saw the emergency workers unbuckle me and take me away. And that's the last time I remember being here, at least in the here and now, for what seemed like many, many lifetimes. It was almost forever that I was away. And where I went is a place I call the place between here and there. I had grave, grave injuries. I had a fractured spine. I had compound fractures in my hip. I had internal bleeding that was the most life-threatening. I had to go to surgery more than once for them to stop the bleeding because it was killing me. I had a traumatic brain injury. There were just so many injuries I could go on. The doctor once told me that usually when reading my injury report, he said, this is more common on an autopsy report, not on someone who is alive. In my hospital room, in my hospital bed, once they got me stabilized, to the rest of the world, I was hooked up to these machines and I was laying in this hospital bed. But to myself, in my spirit, I was someplace else. I was in this beautiful, beautiful place. I was in a coma for a month, but in this place, I had so many experiences that it felt like I had more experiences in this place than I had in my actual life. See, here in this place is that time didn't exist the way it exists here, is that the passage of time is based upon your experiences or things happening here. You see the sun rise, you see the sun set, you see the changing of the seasons. You have appointments in the future. There was none of that there. What it was, the way the passage of time happened, is that you had certain understandings and experiences in this place, and you grew from those experiences. And you could look back at your awareness, the growth in your awareness, the growth in your spiritual growth, and that gave you the sense of time passing. And so the very first place I was in a work-like setting. I didn't know I was anyplace else. I didn't know anything had happened. And I was helping people solve computer problems. But I began to realize that the problems I was solving really had nothing to do with computers. It had to do, there was a physical reason why we did things, but there was another reason. There was a spiritual learning and growth that goes from every one of our experiences. In this place, I learned what I first called the language of the universe. What I mean by that is that I was taught certain lessons. And what I believe is this place is sort of like what the Catholics call purgatory. It's not the place you go where you pass, and it's not certainly not here. But really what it is, it's a place of transition from your physical body into your spiritual body to return back to that spirit. These are all things that I learned there. I was a 0 on the spirituality scale before this experience. So I had nothing to work on. So I think I was going through spirituality 101. And it wasn't like someone gave me a book and I opened up the book and, okay, Stephen, here's chapter 1. This is what you're going to learn. No, I had to figure everything out myself. Nobody's teaching you. You are learning through observing and experiencing and reacting to those experiences. For example, I was working with this fellow who I knew from real life, and he looked exactly the way I remembered him. And I recognized him right away and greeted him, and I helped him with his problem. And then I saw him again, but he was much older. He must have aged 50 years. And I recognized him. Of course, I recognized him. And then I saw him again, and he was a child, but still, there was something about him. It was a saying, something he would say, or a mannerism. And I'd be like, I know who this is. You're so-and-so. And this went on, literally hundreds of times, that this gentleman appeared to me in all different ways. He appeared to me as a woman sometimes, as an older woman. He appeared to me as different races or different heights and different, just every way he tried to fool me. But what happened is over a period of time is I didn't need to look at him. I began to be able to sense him. I was beginning to understand and sense his inner spirit, that part of us, all of us, that doesn't die, that really was never born, was created with the universe. I was being taught that we all have a spirit. And so once I understood and I could sense his spirit, I started to feel spirit in everything around me, because now I could feel spirit in things. And I realized everything had a spirit. The trees, rocks, the planets, the universe. And all these spirits were different, but they were all connected. There was a commonness. And I began to realize that we are all connected. Everything is connected. And what I began to understand is that the creator and the creation are one. And so that was the first lesson that I learned there, is that we are all connected. And then the next experience I had is that I've later learned to be a life review. And what I did is I reviewed all the things that happened in my life. Not that I was living them, or not that I was seeing them as a voyeur, but almost as if I was everywhere, that I was part of everything. And I was aware of everything that went on. And I was aware of every thought that everyone had around me in every situation. And all of a sudden, my life took on new meanings. Every interaction I had, I saw that it was different for everyone else there. Everyone had their own purpose for being in every situation. And so when I reviewed my life, I would learn so many things about new situations. And I've learned so much wisdom from my experiences. And then when I completed my life review, my awareness was raised. And then I would do my life review again. Now I could look at my life review with a new set of eyes, with my increased awareness. And that went on time and time again. But as I began to address very, very deep and dark pains in my life, each time I overcame that dark episode, I would feel bliss. I would feel enlightened. I would feel like this big weight was lifted off me, because I had an understanding of the meaning and the message, and that fueled my spiritual growth and my happiness. For me, the beauty was in being free from all of the pains of life. It's that it was just, imagine that you had no anxiety. You weren't angry with anybody. You didn't have any hate or jealousy towards anybody. No one felt that way about you. And it was blissful each time, no matter how difficult that life review was going to be. I knew at the end, I would feel bliss. And then when I stopped learning, I moved on to the next situation. And the next situation, I found myself in a restaurant, and I was in charge of these children, young adults. They were old enough to work, and I was teaching them how to work in a restaurant. No matter what I did with these kids, they would not listen to me. I tried everything and I knew I was failing. I just didn't know what to do. Is that I tried red team, blue team, come on, let's go. And they would say, yes, yes, yes. And they'd look so sincere, but then they would be gone. And I was truly at my wit's end. And then there was a lady there who was always praying. And I didn't understand what her purpose was, because everyone there had a purpose. But what this lady did, I couldn't hear what she was saying, but I felt this loving energy coming from her. It was like the prayer, it didn't matter what she was saying. The prayer was almost like a road, which this beautiful, loving energy rode upon to visit with me. And that did give me a strength. It really did, as I felt that. She could have been saying anything, but it was a pathway to bring this healing love and light to me. And finally, when I was at my wit's end, I stood before the owner and I wanted some guidance. And then the owner looked at me and placed his hands on my shoulders. And all of a sudden, everything changed. It was almost like Dorothy opening up the door in The Wizard of Oz and all the bright colors. It wasn't bright colors in that sense, but all of a sudden I realized that I had totally misjudged the situation. I was dealing with the physical experience of what was going on and not the spiritual situation of what was going on. You see, I was being taught all of these experiences, all this knowledge. And when the first time I got to use this experience, all this knowledge, I forgot about it. And I just saw the kids as dopey kids who wouldn't listen. But now when I looked on the kids with a new set of eyes, I saw that they were really spirits who had yet to have a human incarnation. And I was there to shepherd them, to mentor them in to their first human experience. And when I stood before the owner, I began to realize something, that I was looking at me, that I was looking at my higher self, that part of me that is always in spirit. And just part of me comes down. I use the word down metaphorically, but comes down to earth to have a human experience, to make the mistakes that my higher self could never make, so I could learn and grow and add it to my continuation of consciousness. I believe I was being tested to determine whether I would stay in spirit or perhaps come down to earth again, return to my body that was still alive. And so then I found myself in yet a third place. I come from this little town in Kings Park, Long Island, New York, very small town. And there's this place we call the Bluff. And at the end of the day, everyone from town goes to the Bluff and drinks coffee. Some people drink other things from, red Solo cups that isn't coffee. And we talk about the day. We find out who's doing who and all the small town gossip. And I found myself there with two of my old friends, Joey and Johnny from Kings Park. And so every day, and I use the term day very loosely, but every day I sat with them and we'd watch the sunset together. And this went on and on and on, over and over and over again. And then one day, as I realized something, I realized both Joe and John had passed earlier that year. And that was just so shocking to me. It really was, is that how could this be happening? It was the first time, even though I've been through all these crazy things, it's the first time that I began to realize that something's going on. I mean, really, is that they can't be here. And I wanted to ask them why they're here, but I just couldn't do it. I don't know why. And it went on, and what was a pleasurable experience now started to be an experience of anxiety for the first time. This was the first time that I really had, I guess, fear. And each time I sat with them, I said, I have them to myself. I said, I have to ask them why they're here. And as time went on, my anxiety built and built, and it got almost unbearable. And I felt a certain urgency. One day I felt like if I didn't ask them now, I would never get this opportunity again. And so I asked them, what are you doing here? And they told me they're here to make sure that I'm all right. I'm all right. I didn't know what that meant. I'm all right. I really didn't know. I didn't remember the motorcycle accident. I didn't remember anything. All I remembered was this life that I was living. And I was, up until the end, I was so happy. And then we watched the sun set. And as the sun set, instead of getting dimmer, it got brighter and brighter and brighter until I had to shield my eyes. And I shielded my eyes. And then when I felt the light dimming, I opened my eyes and I was in my hospital room. And my mother was holding my hand. And she was telling me that I had been in a terrible accident, but I was going to be okay. And that she was here for me. And that's the way I returned. But it wasn't like a light switch. It was like that moment, yes. But after that, it was like I was still there in that place and still here. It was like a transition back to my physical body. And it took some time. But as time went on, as I started to realize something, that lady who was praying, I knew who that lady was. That was actually a dear friend of mine, a person who I was in the PTA with and who I went hiking with. She was my dear friend, a lady called Kathy. And I wanted so bad to tell her that I heard her prayers, but I was tied down and I was intubated. You know, it was the first time I was tied down with my clothes on before. But I wanted to get the tubes out of me. And as soon as I got the tubes out of me, I was given my phone and I texted her right away. And I told her I heard her prayers and I wanted her to come see me right away the very next day. And Kathy came to visit me often when I came out of the hospital, out of rehab. And we would go on long walks together. And sometimes I would talk about stuff, but most of the times I just kind of kept to myself. And she was an athlete. And so she really pushed me. She was the best physical therapist out there. And at this time, we were just friends. We had known each other for like 20 years. But as this went on, I started to have feelings that were, I think, a little different as I started to get better. But then one day, as I realized, there was such a surety of the outcome that I knew if I did these things, I would get better. I knew it, no matter how difficult it was, because it was so difficult to walk. It was such a challenge. And then I thought of Joey and John. When they said I was going to be all right, they didn't mean there. They meant here. They meant here that they were going to be my spirit guides, that they were going to help me. Because Joey broke his back. I broke my back. Johnny lost his life from the diabetes, from the infections in his leg. And my leg was all busted up. Who better was in a situation to help me through this time? And it's not like they said, one more push-up, one more push-up. No, I felt their energy in the same way that I stood before my higher self. And I felt that energy. I felt their energy. And that's what gave me the ability to go forward. And then one day I went down in my basement and I found my 20-year-old boy dead from a drug overdose. I mean, what do you say? You know, it happened all of a sudden. 1 second, everything was wonderful. He's on a scholarship to a Division I engineering school. And the next moment, he's lying lifeless in my basement. And I thought of all the things that how did I fail him? Really, how did I fail him? Is that, you know, being an old biker personality wasn't so funny now. And then one day, my cousin went to a medium to hopefully connect with one of her lost relatives. And the medium said, a Nick is trying to come through. And that's my son's name. Do you want him to come through? And my cousin said, yes. And she said that, have you been seeing flowers? And she texted us right away and asked if we've been seeing flowers. And we've been seeing roses. It's so ridiculous. We'd be hiking on the path in February and we'd see a rose on the ground. And we began to see roses in all these places. And Kathy was telling me, she's saying, so someone's trying to communicate with us. I knew who she meant by the someone, but I wasn't buying any of this. It just seemed so unpractical to me. And then the medium said, my son has a synchronicity with Saint Teresa, and he is sending the flowers. And then one day I was out hiking with Kathy, and she asked me, did Nick ever try to contact me? And I was outraged by this. I really was, because I was dealing with this grief, and she had been so kind to me. But that wasn't anything real to me. I'm dealing with this real intense grief and coming to terms with this. And she's talking about my son connecting with me and the medium and stuff. And I told her the medium can look up something on Facebook and stuff. You're probably posting something about the flowers and blah, blah, blah. And she was saying, no, no, no. She didn't even know us. She didn't know anything that we were related in any way. And I just still didn't buy it. Then she pulled this St. Teresa statue out of her pocket and she put it next to a tree and right next to a babbling brook. It's something out of Central Casting. It really was. She had brought flowers with her and she brought a pen and she brought a rock and she wrote a prayer to Nick on the rock and she placed it next to St. Teresa's statue underneath this tree and left the pen there, one of those magic markers. And about a week later, we came back. Kathy had a card in her pocket that was given to her by my cousin who had gone to the medium. It was a St. Teresa prayer card. And so we looked at the prayer card really for the first time. And Kathy pointed out to me that St. Teresa's birthday was January 2nd. That was my son's birthday. And then I looked on the card and I saw the day that St. Teresa was canonized was May 19th. That's the day my son passed. How does that happen? That maybe this is real. And then that night when I slept, my son came to me in a dream. He was saying so goodbye, that everything was going to be okay. And I thought about the place between here and there. And I thought that he must be experiencing so many of the beautiful things that I was experiencing. And he was transitioning into spirit. That was so meaningful to me. And those are some of the things that come into terms with my near-death experiences and the things that had happened before and the things that were yet to happen, because they caught the fella who sold my son the drugs and they put him on trial and they charged him with second-degree murder, the very same charge that they charged the gentleman who caused the death of that little girl and the limo driver in that head-on crash. And I was looking forward to going to that trial. I really was. And I was building up hatred in my heart. I really wanted to be angry. And I really wanted to express how I felt. I wanted that young man to feel my pain. But you see, when I got there and I saw that kid, he was a kid. He was a drug-addicted kid. It reminded me of the other young man who was on trial. And I felt nothing. I felt love for this guy. I felt sorry for him. Not a moment of anger. I wanted things to be better for him. I wanted him to turn his life around. I couldn't feel anger. All I could feel was love for this young man. You see, I think that whole experience with that trial of the young man in that head-on collision, I think that was part of my life review, where I came to terms with so many things that had happened there that had prepared me for this moment. And they convicted that young man as well and gave him 16 years, the very same sentence. And I think about that young man often, and I hope that someday he gets his life on track. But then when I look at everything that's happened, these three events that I experienced, this traumatic accident with the deaths of this young girl and a limo driver under these tragic circumstances, I had this crazy near-death experience that brought me from a 0 on a spirituality scale to a very spiritually aware person. And then to lose my son and to go through all of these experiences and then to end with this young man on trial. Like, how does this happen? Like, I never got the impression when I was in that other place that life was like laid out for me, but everything fits together so well. And I can't help but think that in some way it is all connected, that this near-death experience was the greatest gift of all that a person could ever experience. And if there's one last thing as I could leave you with that I've learned from this experience, is that life is good and people are good, even when very sad things happen. And that's the truth. These are just words, they're meaningless words. But if you can walk the path in your life and be able to find out for yourself in your own way why this is so, you will find peace in this world and any other world that comes after it. I thank you for allowing me to share my story with you. Sat Nam. and peace and love always.